Hey guys, in this video we're going to go over 4 over-the-board games from our Discord's member PrestaJay. PrestaJay is one of the moderators for ChessGoals. He's an awesome guy. He plays in a lot of our events. He's always positive, and he's been highlighted in the blog before because he's gained so many points on a ChessGoals study plan. So I'll put links in the description below to that, and I believe he was also in another video on our channel. I'll link to that below as well. And please make sure to like and subscribe. We don't have the dog cam today, but we got the dog preview. Alright, enjoy the video. Alright, so here we go with game number 1 from PrestaJay's tournament. Here he's playing the white pieces. And if you look at the chart, this is something we're going to focus on in each game. One thing we'll notice with the charts is every game in this tournament, PrestaJay had some winning opportunities. So what we're going to focus on in this video is going through the games and talking about just the spots that he could improve converting the win. And this is something that I've worked on myself quite a bit, so I think hopefully this will be instructive for everyone. So here in this first game we reach the position where we have 2 rooks for white against a rook and a knight for black and an extra pawn for black. The problem here is the black knight has this defensive resource where it can play knight to e5, and it's a very solid setup for black. It's really hard to break through as white. So here what I was looking for is what's a simple plan that we can use as white to try to convert this to a win. And in the game, black played rook to c7, and PrestaJay played king to e4. And I think king to e4 is an okay move, according to the engine. You still hold a lot of your advantages. But what I'd like to see you do here, PrestaJay, take the time on the clock at this point and really try to figure out what can I do to convert? What's the winning plan? If we can trade off one set of rooks, that'll help convert, because 2 rooks against 1, oftentimes you want to swap off one set of rooks if you're the side that has 2. So let's start here by putting a rook on c5, pinning the knight to the black rook. Alright, so now let's say black defends the knight an extra time with the king. Here I'm going to bring this rook back, getting ready to double. And black's in a little bit of a zugzwang here, right? Black has to keep making waiting moves, and pretty soon we can run black out of moves. So now let's stack the rooks on the knight. We see both rooks hitting c6, and if black keeps waiting, now we have rook to d5 check, deflecting the king away from the knight. And after king to e6, rook takes a5, securing the first pawn, and then we can go on to win from here. So this is game number 1. This was the endgame. PrestaJay, there's some tips for you to help convert this endgame, but I think this comes down to a time management takeaway. You know, at this point you have to really spend the time and figure out what's a good plan, because it's very concrete. You can kind of make a bunch of moves in a row in your head and decide, how do I want the rook set up, where do I want the king, in order to convert this to a win. Alright, so game number 1 was a draw. This is game number 2 by PrestaJay in his OTB event. Here he's playing the black pieces, and he is up 1 pawn currently, but there's this annoying pawn on d7 trying to promote with 2 rooks behind it. So in the game, PrestaJay played pawn to b6, but after a takes b, and rook a1, white was able to get enough counterplay for the pawn. So here what I'm recommending is c5. It's actually very similar to what you did in the game, PrestaJay. It's just that calculation will make it more accurate. So game number 1 we talked about spending a bit more time and calculating out exactly how you want to convert the win. This is going to be very similar. This is a position where you want to spend the time and really focus on calculating. So now let's give white a move, rook to b3, hitting this pawn. Now we go ahead and play the move that you played in the game, pawn to b6. And after a takes b, what's going to happen is this rook can come around and help scoop up this pawn if white defends. So let's say rook here, rook c6, give white a move, rook c7, and now this pawn is going to drop. So that's the way I would recommend converting this position, PrestaJay. Start with c5 and then do the exact plan you played in the game with pawn to b6. So here now we're looking at game number 3. PrestaJay is playing the white pieces. We've seen 2 draws so far. Both of them had advantages for both sides. But we wanted to talk about how to convert these games from PrestaJay's point of view. This game, the conversion happens in the middle game. So it's not the end game like the last puzzle. And if we look at this position, material is even. Only one pawn is off the board for each side. But look at the imbalances. So white's got this strong center with extra space. Both bishops well placed. Got the extra space on the queen side. It has this knight on a4. So really white can look to play on both sides of the board. In the game, PrestaJay played h3. But what I would like to see here is a quick focus on the queen side. So I think knight to c5 immediately is a very strong move. And after the bishop goes back to e8, now play something like bishop to b1. So this is very similar to the game, except there was no knight f4. So let's just say black played knight f4, trying to get active. Now you could play pawn to g3, kick that knight back very easily, h4, and what's happening here is you're expanding on both sides of the board, really playing with full control, and I think it's a tough position to play for black. So let's say he does something like the game, plays f6. Well, now this e-pawn's under attack, we can immediately capture on e6. So there's no f-pawn break for black. Okay, what else can black do? What if they play pawn to b6? Well, now we could play a move like knight to d3, and what's happening here is we're going to play h5, open up the black king side, and we still have good control on the queen side. So we're kind of sitting on this position, but at the same time we're trying to improve both sides of the board all at once. So in the game, let's see what happened. h3 was played, and after knight f4, bishop retreat f6, knight e6 comes just a little bit too late. Even though white still has an advantage, you weren't able to tie down this e6 pawn like we saw with the immediate knight to c5. So I think that was the big improvement in this game. And again, so the theme that we're seeing here, PrestaJay, is calculation. Calculate, calculate, calculate. And we'll talk a little bit more about that after game number 4, how we can work on these calculation skills. Okay, here we are with game number 4. So in this game, PrestaJay is playing the black pieces, 3 draws so far, and is trying to figure out how to convert this position. It's a -5 according to Stockfish, but it's very messy. So it's a position where you could quickly lose that -5 advantage, which is what ended up happening in the game. So here in the game, PrestaJay played e5. I think it's a strong idea, e5, but it's giving up some of your advantages. So let's look at the imbalance comparison here. PrestaJay has these strong queenside pawns pointing towards a queenside attack. The advantage on king safety. I would say this bishop is stronger than white's bishop. So there's probably a slight advantage with the minor pieces, but the biggest advantage is going to come from this king safety issue. So how do we take advantage of this king safety imbalance without giving white too much counterplay? The best way to do it, I think, is to move the queen and immediately rush this b pawn up the board. Because what happens after e5, d takes e5, now white's starting to get a little counterplay. Knight takes e5 was played in the game, and what's happening here is white could play bishop takes e5, bishop takes, move like knight to c2, and all of a sudden this h-pawn is coming, and white's getting a pretty balanced attack with the center that's semi-open, so white's able to fight back that way as well. There might even be a move like knight to d1, kicking this bishop and the d5 pawns being attacked. So let's go back to queen a5 instead of e5. Let's say white plays knight to f3 here, b5 right away, and if knight e1 trying to kick the bishop, we can tuck him back, and b4 is coming up next. Alright, so let's say knight to c2 is played, trying to defend this b5 or b4 square. Now we can play rook f to c8, and look at how all of our forces are pointing at the white king. Got the rook on c8, this rook ready to come to b8, everything's attacking. Alright, so f4 for white. Let's try to get e4 in and disrupt this attack. Here we have bishop takes c2, and after king takes, pawn to b4, and let's say c takes, knight takes, we're crashing through here. King b1, we can play a move like rook to c6, we could play queen to b6, queen to a4 is even a move. Let's look at queen to b6. But what we can see is happening here is we haven't allowed white to get any counterplay in return for this attack. All right, so let's give white h4. Now knight to d3, hitting g2, or b2, sorry. This knight is wedged in here. And really you can see how this attack is coming to life. And again, white's attack is very slow. And PrestaJay, you should be able to play this out for the win. All right, so to summarize, we have 4 games here. All 4 games ended in a draw. But I think the key takeaway for you, PrestaJay, is to really focus on calculation. Calculate as deeply and as accurately as you can. And the best way to train this is to play games, get into these positions, and then train with them, right? So after a game, let's say you had a position where you know you were winning, give yourself 10 minutes on the clock, even 15 minutes, and say, okay, take this chart, find a point where you had a large advantage, and not just necessarily like a tactical blunder, but try to figure out what did I miss in the planning, right? And really just work through the lines and keep forcing yourself to work through those lines and be concrete, be as accurate as possible. And the other thing you can do is do really difficult tactics puzzles. So we have like the daily puzzles in the Discord that are pretty difficult. We also have the Yusupov books that are really difficult puzzles. And another thing I like to recommend is go on chess.com, do the puzzles unrated, and set the rating a couple hundred points above your puzzle rating. And really force yourself to try to solve them with a high rate of accuracy. Try to solve like 90% of the puzzles when they're a couple hundred points above your rating, and give yourself 10 or 15 minutes. Set a timer, because what that'll do is it's really going to train your brain to work hard and play accurate and calculate out all the variations. And those puzzles are positions where you have the advantage. You just have to find it, right? So it's very similar to gameplay. All right, so that wraps up the recap of PrestaJay's games. Hope you guys liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Check the links below, and we'll see you in the next video.